6,000 munitions, 16 days. That is how long it took the United States military to consume weapons that took years to build, and were positioned for a very different war. On February 28, 2026, the United States and Israel launched coordinated airstrikes against Iran. Within the first 16 days of combat operations, the U.S. military fired 535 Tomahawk cruise missiles, nearly 17% of the entire American stockpile, gone in under 3 weeks. By April, the Center for Strategic and International Studies published its assessment. At least 45% of precision strike missiles expended, between 50 and 80% of THAAD interceptors, the systems designed to stop ballistic missile attacks, depleted, and roughly 50% of Patriot air defense interceptors consumed. The total cost in munitions alone, $24 billion, and climbing. For the first time in 2 decades, 3 American carrier strike groups are operating simultaneously in the Middle East. That level of power projection requires an enormous logistical chain. It requires munitions, and those munitions had to come from somewhere. Many of them came from Asia. The Army's Typhon long-range missile system, the Navy Marine Expeditionary Ship Interdiction System, NMESIS, High Mobility Artillery Rocket Systems, HIMARS. These were not warehouse stockpiles sitting in reserve. These were Pacific deterrence assets, systems pre-positioned along the first island chain, specifically designed to contain a potential Chinese military move toward Taiwan, now redirected, now counted on a different strategic balance sheet. Senator Mark Kelly, himself a decorated combat pilot, stated it plainly before Congress on May 10, 2026. The munitions are depleted. This is not a political statement. It is a logistics reality, and its consequences are being felt 1,200 miles from the Iranian coast. 1,200 miles from Iran, in Tokyo, Taipei, Seoul, and Manila, defense officials are watching the munitions data with growing alarm. Japan, Taiwan, and South Korea have built their entire security architectures around one foundational assumption: that the United States would always be present, capable, and ready in the Pacific. That assumption is now being stress-tested in real time. Japan's response has been measured but urgent. Tokyo convened an emergency defense policy review panel in late April. Its defense budget has reached 1.4% of GDP, the highest level since 1958, with a stated target of 2% by 2027. For a nation that spent decades deliberately limiting its military expansion, that number represents a fundamental shift in how Tokyo calculates its own vulnerability. Taiwan's government is accelerating procurement on a parallel track. The $2 billion U.S. military aid package announced earlier this year has been fast-tracked, with priority given to systems that can be operational quickly, not long-term capability building. Taipei is watching the Trump-Xi summit negotiations with deep anxiety, concerned that Taiwan could become a diplomatic bargaining chip in a broader Iran resolution deal. The fear is not irrational. When great powers negotiate, smaller states sometimes pay the price of the settlement. And then there is what China has been doing while all of this unfolds. Since 2024, the People's Liberation Army Navy has taken delivery of 12 submarines, including nuclear attack submarines and nuclear ballistic missile submarines, 1 aircraft carrier, 2 cruisers, 10 destroyers, 7 frigates, the largest sustained naval expansion any country has conducted in a generation. China has not paused its shipyards because the United States is fighting in the Middle East. If anything, the pace has accelerated. The Pacific commander told Congress directly, "A U.S. victory in the Iran war is necessary to deter a Chinese military assault on Taiwan. The logic is clear. Demonstrate that American power projection works, that U.S. commitments are credible, and that any attempt to exploit the distraction would carry unacceptable costs. But credibility requires capability, and capability requires stockpiles." During the Balikatan 2026 exercises in April, the United States deployed its Typhon missile system to a remote island in the Luzon Strait, 100 miles south of Taiwan. The signal was deliberate. Washington is reinforcing deterrence with the assets it has remaining. But at that exact same moment, a Chinese naval action group was operating in the same waters. Both sides probing, both sides watching, both sides running the same calculation. US News reported in April that China has already begun adjusting its tactics toward Taiwan and Japan, specifically because of what Beijing reads as a strategic distraction in the Middle East. When your adversary's attention and resources are committed elsewhere, you do not announce your intentions. You prepare quietly, you update your timelines, and you watch. Here is the number that sits at the center of every serious Pacific strategy discussion right now: 3 to 5 years. That is how long the Center for Strategic and International Studies estimates it will take the United States to rebuild its depleted munitions stockpiles to pre-war levels. For some systems, the timeline is far worse. Tomahawk cruise missiles, at least 5 years to replenish at current industrial production rates. THAAD interceptors, the core of American missile defense in the Pacific, between 3 and 8 years, depending on production investment decisions. The industrial base was calibrated for peacetime budgets, not for a war that consumed half a generation's inventory in 7 weeks. You cannot simply accelerate a missile production line overnight. The supply chains, the specialized manufacturing equipment, the trained workforce, all calibrated over decades to produce at peacetime rates. Scaling them requires years of investment, congressional authorization, and industrial coordination that does not happen quickly in any political environment. Fortune magazine identified a deeper structural problem on April 30th. The headline was direct: America needs Beijing's permission to reload. The reason is rare earth minerals, the materials required to manufacture advanced missile guidance systems, sensors, and propulsion components. A significant portion of global production is controlled by China. To rapidly rebuild its missile stockpiles, the United States is partially dependent on the supply chains of the country it is trying to deter. That is not an irony. That is a structural vulnerability that takes a decade of deliberate industrial policy to resolve. Meanwhile, China's shipyards have not slowed. The rate of PLA Navy construction over the last 2 years has no peacetime equivalent in modern history. While Washington depletes its existing inventory in one theater, Beijing adds to its inventory in the theater that matters most for its long-term strategic objectives. The gap is not catastrophic today, but it is real, and it is moving in one direction. Newsweek reported that China's military has already published 5 official lessons drawn from observing the United States fight Iran. Missile saturation can overwhelm air defense systems. Logistics are the real vulnerability in any sustained campaign. Stockpile depth determines strategic endurance. The first 72 hours are decisive. Allied cohesion fractures under sustained pressure. These are not academic observations published for domestic consumption. They are being integrated into operational planning. Strategists call it a readiness window, a defined period during which a competitor knows that a potential adversary is operating below full capability. A window is not a guarantee of action. Military history is full of windows that opened and closed without being exploited. Deterrence held, calculations shifted, and the moment passed. But a window that is visible, measurable, and extensively documented in open source analysis changes the strategic environment for every actor involved. The United States is aware of all of this. The Indo-Pacific Command is building what it calls a denial defense: forward-deployed long-range missiles along the first island chain. Deeper integration with Japan, Australia, and the Philippines, $2 billion in accelerated military support to Taiwan, and the Typhon system positioned 100 miles from the Taiwan Strait. The message is deliberate. Any attempt to exploit this window will be met with unacceptable costs, regardless of stockpile levels. The question every analyst is asking is whether that message is being received clearly. Japan is spending more than it has in 67 years. Taiwan is acquiring capabilities faster than any previous timeline. South Korea and the Philippines are hedging. The alliance network is not collapsing, but it is shifting. Allies that once relied entirely on U.S. forward presence are making calculations about what happens if that presence is contested, delayed, or redirected. The United States made a rational strategic choice in February 2026. Confront Iran's nuclear program, prevent a breakout that would fundamentally alter Middle Eastern security, maintain credibility as a guarantor of regional order. These were defensible decisions made by serious people working with serious information. But rational choices in one theater create real costs in another. The Pacific is where those costs are being counted, and the ledger will not be settled until the stockpiles are rebuilt, the alliances are reinforced, and the window, if it remains open, is closed by capability rather than calculation alone. The next 3 to 5 years will answer one question above all others. Can the United States rebuild fast enough? Nothing stays hidden. Everything gets decoded. If this analysis gave you a clearer picture of what is actually happening, subscribe. We cover what others miss before the headlines catch up.